HOA Karen kept taking over my backyard for BBQs. But never expected her own house to burn down. It was a typical day in a quiet suburban neighborhood where peace reigned and the rules of the Homeowners Association, HOA, were taken very seriously. The neatly trimmed lawns, the perfectly manicured bushes, and the rigid regulations were all part of the charm that made the community feel secure and orderly. The neighbors respected each other's privacy. And everyone followed the rules. Or so it seemed. I had lived here for several years, content in my comfortable home, enjoying the calm and predictable nature of the place. Then, one fateful afternoon, Karen, the infamous and self-appointed leader of the HOA, decided to make her presence known once again. Karen was one of those individuals who believed that her position as an HOA board member gave her the right to do whatever she pleased, regardless of how it affected others. So, without asking or even notifying anyone, Karen set up a large barbecue grill right in the middle of my backyard, bringing over bags of charcoal and a cooler of drinks. Her reasoning: she claimed that since the neighborhood was so tight-knit and friendly, she thought it would be a great idea to host a barbecue. But she never bothered to ask if I was okay with it. It didn't matter to her that this was my space, she simply assumed that as someone with influence, she could do whatever she wanted. I watched in disbelief as she fired up the grill, completely ignoring the fact that I hadn't given her permission. It was clear Karen didn't see any need to respect boundaries. After all, she was the HOA's golden child. As Karen arranged her grill and set up picnic tables, she casually turned to me and flashed one of those smiles she always wore when she was trying to manipulate a situation. "You know," she said in a sweet, overly friendly tone, "your backyard is just the perfect spot for a barbecue. It's so spacious. And I didn't want to bother the other neighbors with the noise and smell. This way, we can have a good time without disturbing anyone." She acted as though she was doing me a favor by choosing my yard. I could feel my patience wearing thin. But I didn't want to escalate the situation. Karen was, after all, the most vocal member of the HOA. And I knew how things worked in this neighborhood. If I made a fuss, I could easily end up being labeled as the difficult one. And I wasn't in the mood to deal with her potential retribution. Reluctantly, I nodded and forced a smile. "Well, I suppose it's fine. Just keep it contained," I said, though every fiber of my being screamed to tell her to leave. But Karen didn't seem to care about my hesitancy. She waved me off and continued to set up her little impromptu party, completely oblivious to my discomfort. As the hours passed, I watched her as she casually enjoyed the barbecue, laughing with her friends, completely ignoring the fact that she was invading my private space. All I could do was sit on my porch, feeling like an outsider in my own home, watching her make herself at home in a place where she clearly didn't belong. I wanted to tell her to leave, but I stayed silent, unsure of the consequences that might follow. As the evening wore on, the tension in the air grew thicker. What started as a casual gathering quickly turned into an unpleasant ordeal. Karen and her friends ate and drank without a care in the world, leaving empty bottles, leftover food, and greasy napkins scattered all over my once pristine backyard. The smell of burnt meat lingered in the air long after the grill had been shut down, and the smoke had settled, leaving a dull, burnt scent clinging to everything. My patience had finally run out. I walked over to Karen, trying my best to stay calm. But my frustration was evident. "Karen, I need you to clean up. You've used my yard for your party without asking. And now there's trash everywhere. This is my private space. And I don't want it to be a mess. Karen glanced at me, unfazed, and gave me one of those condescending smiles that I had grown so accustomed to. "Oh, come on," she chuckled. "It's just a little mess. You're making a big deal out of nothing. We're all neighbors here. Right? The whole point of this barbecue was to bring everyone together. It's about building community. You should be happy to help with that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was using her position as an HOA member to justify her actions, claiming that it was somehow her right to do whatever she wanted because community building was more important than respecting someone's private property. She was literally laughing it off. Like none of this mattered. I tried to keep my composure, but my voice shook with frustration. "I don't care about your community building nonsense, Karen. This is my yard. And I'm not going to let you use it however you please." But instead of apologizing or agreeing to clean up, Karen just shrugged, said she would get to it later, and turned her attention back to her friends. It was clear now that Karen had no respect for boundaries. And I was beginning to realize that confronting her would only make things worse. But I couldn't just let it slide either. Something needed to be done. It was a warm evening, and the sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the neighborhood. The barbecue was still in full swing at Karen's impromptu party, and the smell of charred meat and sizzling vegetables filled the air. Karen, despite the mess she had left behind earlier, seemed to be enjoying herself, laughing and joking with her friends around the grill. But as I sat on my porch, trying to enjoy what was left of my evening, something went horribly wrong. There was a loud crackling sound, followed by a sharp hiss. I turned just in time to see flames bursting out of the side of the grill, quickly growing bigger and hotter. In an instant, the fire began to spread up the side of the grill, igniting the nearby tablecloth and then quickly jumping to the wooden deck. Karen screamed and rushed towards the flames, trying to smother them with a fire extinguisher that she grabbed from the garage. But it was too late. The fire, now completely out of control, started to engulf the wooden steps and the side of her house. Thick black smoke poured from the windows, and the heat radiated toward my own home, making the air almost unbearable. Karen's face turned pale as she realized what was happening. She shouted for her friends to call 911. But the damage had already been done. The fire was spreading so fast that there was nothing anyone could do. I watched in a mixture of shock and disbelief as the flames continued to grow, licking the walls of Karen's house, quickly eating through the wooden beams. By the time the fire department arrived, her home was already in ruins, with only the charred remains of the deck and some of the exterior still standing. It was a nightmare come to life. And despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a little unsettled. The consequences of Karen's careless actions had finally caught up with her, and the neighborhood would never be the same. But in that moment, all I could think about was the fire that had destroyed everything she held dear, and how she had unwittingly made her own mess even worse. In the days following the fire, the true scope of the damage to Karen's home became apparent. The once beautiful house, which had stood proudly in the neighborhood, was now a charred shell of its former self. The fire had ravaged the exterior, leaving nothing but scorched walls and blackened wood. The roof, partially collapsed in places, was a grim reminder of the chaos that had unfolded that evening. Karen, visibly shaken and distraught, was forced to find temporary accommodation with her relatives while her home was repaired. Despite the calamity, I was relieved that my house had remained untouched by the flames. My backyard, though now stained with the memory of the barbecue disaster, was still intact. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of guilt. Though there was no denying that Karen's reckless behavior had caused a great deal of harm. Yet, a small part of me felt vindicated for all the frustration I had endured at her hands. But the fire had more lasting consequences than just the physical damage to her property. The entire neighborhood was buzzing with talk about Karen and her ill-fated barbecue. People began to view her in a new light, one that was far less favorable. Neighbors who had previously tolerated her and her self-righteous attitude now openly criticized her actions. Typical Karen. I overheard one neighbor mutter as they passed by. Always thinks she can do whatever she wants without consequences. Even the HOA board, which had once been so quick to support her, found themselves distancing from her. Some members privately whispered about her carelessness, and there were murmurs of potential legal action against her for the fire's cause. It was clear that Karen's reputation in the community had taken a massive hit. As for me, I had become an unwilling witness to her downfall. But I couldn't ignore the fact that the neighborhood had changed. People were more cautious now, less willing to trust Karen. And, for the first time in a long while, I felt a shift in the balance of power within the community. Karen's mistakes had, in a way, brought people together in their shared disdain for her disregard for others. The neighborhood would never be the same. And neither would Karen. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath of the fire left the community grappling with more than just the damage to Karen's property. Rumors spread like wildfire. And soon, the HOA members launched their own investigation into whether Karen had violated any safety rules regarding her barbecue. It didn't take long for the details to surface. According to fire department reports, Karen had failed to follow basic fire safety protocols. She hadn't kept the grill a safe distance from the house, and she had neglected to properly monitor it while it was in use. There were even reports that the grill had been overfilled with charcoal, exacerbating the fire's spread. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Karen's recklessness had been a major factor in the fire. The community's patience, which had already been stretched thin with her previous behavior, was now completely gone. The HOA began discussing the possibility of holding Karen accountable for her actions, with several residents expressing their concern that such negligence could not go unpunished. In the end, Karen was forced to take responsibility for the fire. She faced fines for violating community safety standards and was even required to pay for some of the damages to her neighbors' properties that had been affected by the blaze. But the real blow came when Karen realized how deeply her reputation had been tarnished. The once dominant HOA board member, the queen of the community, was now a pariah in the very neighborhood she had once controlled. The lesson Karen learned was harsh but necessary. No one, no matter how influential, has the right to take others' property or space for granted. She had learned that her entitlement, her careless actions, and her disregard for others' boundaries had serious consequences. The fire that had destroyed her home was more than just an accident, it was a wake-up call. And as for the rest of us, the community had been forever changed. We had learned the importance of standing up for ourselves, of not letting someone else trample over our rights, no matter how powerful they might seem. The day Karen took responsibility was the day she finally lost her grip on the community. From then on, the neighborhood would no longer be ruled by a single, selfish voice, but by a collective that valued respect and mutual consideration. And that, in itself, was a victory. What do you think about Karen's actions and the outcome of her barbecue disaster? Do you think she got what she deserved? Or was it too much? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a comment. Hit the like button. And subscribe to stay tuned for more crazy HOA drama and wild neighborhood tales. Your support helps me bring you more stories just like this one.